I told their sea god to pick a better storm if he wanted me gone. Then the wind shoved me sideways and I almost stepped off the wet edge. My boots skidded on a slick flagstone. I grabbed a rusted ring on the wall and laughed, breathless. "Nice try," I said to the whole mess. It was just spray and noise and old stones. I had a job. The locals had called it a temple on the cliffs. Prayers to a god under the waves. Offerings. All that. They told me not to go up there when the weather turned. I told them I'd be in and out. "I'm not here to kneel," I said, "just to count rings." I had my pack and my rope and a cheap lantern and my recorder. The path in was a shelf cut into the cliff with broken steps and a low wall that did nothing. The sea was white and mean below. Gulls hung in the wind in a long line down shore, but none of them came over this place. That stuck with me. Gulls will land on anything. Not here. The front arch was half fallen. There were circles carved around it, bands of symbols cut deep in rings. People had traced them with chalk and grease for years. I set my hand on the stone and it felt warm. Slick from the rain, gritty, but under all that it had a heat to it, like someone had just pressed their palm there. I told myself it was trapped air, sun on a crack, whatever. I said, "Cozy," and got to work. I clicked on the recorder and held it up. "Temple site," I said. "Rings on entrance arch, 7 bands, spiral marks." The red light blinked. I trained it on the carvings. It went dead. No power. I clicked it again. Worked fine when I stepped back off the threshold. I tried once more under the arch. Dead. I laughed. I said, "Batteries hate gods," and put the recorder in my pocket. The first chamber had rings cut into the floor too, and into the pillars, all the way around. Each ring had little notches. The whole place stank of salt. Not clean sea salt. Old, sour salt. It came in breaths from the cracks, like air drawn in and pushed out, but slow, like the place had lungs. I checked the time. An hour or two before the worst of the surge, or so I thought. I moved slow and steady and marked each ring on the floor with my number tags, took photos, sketched, all that. Some iron was set into the stone too, links, anchors, inset rings thick with rust. I tapped one with my knuckle and it shivered, like something deep under the floor moved and tugged it once. Just once. I stood like an idiot, listening. Only the wind and the sea. "Loose masonry," I said. I said a lot of things like that. The offerings were piled in the corners. Little jars with stones cemented inside, lead blocks with rope handles, discs of iron. Everyone had written about how the faithful brought heavy things to please the god. That made no sense to me. Who brings weights to a storm god? Fishermen bring fish. But I picked one up anyway to get a look at the marks under it. It was heavy enough to make my back talk. I set it aside and rubbed at the groove it had covered. The ring there had a different set of symbols. They looked like prayers at first glance, but the syntax was wrong. If that makes sense. The verbs were bent away, like the words tried not to say what they meant. I told myself I was tired. I moved deeper. The rooms ran inward in a line. Each arch had more rings cut around it, carved so exact I could slot a finger along the groove. My lantern flared and calmed as the wind got into it. The flame made a little cone of light, and the rest was gray and wet. Twice it went out with a sound like someone with wet lips kissing the flame. I relit it with my lighter and told myself not to be clever about it. Near the third arch, the recorder cut again. I took it out and shook it. I stepped out and it whirred. I stepped in and it died. "Okay," I said to the wall. "You win that one." I put it away. The wrong direction wind started in the fourth chamber. It moved against the storm. It blew from inside, out through the arch, cool and steady, and the rain coming in the door hung in it like beads. My lantern guttered. I shielded it with my hand and went on. By then, the low thumps had started. At first I thought storm, waves hitting the cliff, but it wasn't random. It had space between. It was below the stone, not outside. You know how you feel bass in your teeth? Like that, but softer. I told myself it was a cistern under the floor with water in it, pounding. I told myself a lot of things because the thought that there was something under the floor that was, never mind. I didn't think that yet. I found a little room off the fifth chamber with niches cut in the wall. There were rolled papers in a sealed tube, cracked but still tight. I sat on my pack and opened it. Damp held together with grease. Someone had copied the rings. Old hand, maybe 100 years or so. The script was local, but the notes around it were Latin. I speak enough to get by. He had notes like prayers, but he'd scratched them, rewritten them, and put new words above. Hold fast, bind tight, keep it hard. He had underlined the symbols for stop and close 12 times. He had circled the weights in the drawings and written lock. Locks, I said. Okay. I looked at the weights I'd moved. I looked at the hole I'd pried a ring out of with my bar to see how the iron was set. The bar lay where I dropped it, red with wet. My stomach did a slow drop. I tried to put the ring back in its socket. It didn't sit right. The rust had flaked away. It rocked when I touched it. Fine, I said. We'll fix it later. I was talking to myself now, which is always a sign you know you're being stupid. I decided to leave. I'll say that straight. The notes spooked me. The wrong wind, the recorder dying, the little thumps, the warmth in the stone, the weights that were locks. I wrapped the notes in my shirt and stuffed them in the pack. I turned back toward the door. The tide was wrong. The path outside was a white sheet, water sheeting up, not down. The wind came at me from both sides and the middle. My rope, tied off to a post, went slack and then snapped tight like a live thing. It slipped from the cleat while I watched and dropped into the foam. I stepped back, and the arch breathed out a cold, salt stink like a mouth. I swallowed it and tasted metal. Another way, I said. There is no other way. I went back inside. I tried to go out again 20 minutes later, when the surge eased. The little slab door on the left that I hadn't even noticed before was open. A slit I could slide through to another hallway, drier. I took it, thinking I'd find a back stair or a hole down to the beach. The door shut behind me without a sound. I turned and pressed it. It was stone on stone, tight. No handle. I stood in the short, dark and breathed. The lantern croaked and went out with that little wet kiss. I put my hand on the wall and found another ring. Warm again. The low thump was closer here. I put my ear to the stone without thinking and heard water running like blood through it. I pulled back fast and laughed. "You absolute idiot," I said to myself. I fumbled with the lighter and the lantern and got a flame. It made the wet rocks shiny. There were more rings carved here, not around arches, but on the floor in a tight pattern. The notches lined up inward, not outward. Little channels cut between them. I could see where weights had sat on them. Circles within circles. It didn't look like a holy floor. It looked like a lid. I walked around the pattern once and counted. 7 main rings. 12 smaller. Anchors set at the cardinal points, or what would be cardinal if this place cared about the sun. I checked the old notes. He had drawn this and marked it with the same word over and over. Bind. His last lines were just that word, written until the ink ran out. Something tapped my toe. I looked down. My pry bar wasn't at my foot a second ago. It lay on the ring with its tip in one of the notches. It might have slid. The stones were all wet. My lantern hissed and went low. I struck the lighter and burned my thumb. I swore and leaned to adjust the wick. The flame came back and then went long and thin and leaned toward the floor, like the air there had weight. I pulled the bar away. The notch it had touched had been filled with a little plug of lead. The bar had pried it up. It fell into the groove and rolled toward the center. I grabbed at it. It was slick and cold and my fingers missed. It slid into the drain around the little central plate. It clinked like a coin in a well. The low thump under the floor hit harder. Not loud. Deep. I told the empty room to knock it off. "Very funny," I said. "Old places make noise. Everything moves. I get it." I talked so I didn't have to think about the fact that there were less weights on the floor now than before. I had moved two at the entrance. I had lifted one here. I had pulled out a ring. I had poked a lead plug loose. None of it was much by itself. Put together, it was a man picking at string, not seeing the knot tighten. I decided to put it all back. I lugged the weights I could reach to their rings. I set them on the notches and they rocked and didn't settle. The floor was slick. My hand slipped on the iron. The wrong direction wind was steady now. It hissed past my ears and tasted like pennies. The low thumps had found my pulse and were keeping time with it. I went to the entrance to get the heavy block I had moved, and that's when the tide came up at the wrong time, and in the wrong way. It didn't surge in and fall back. It had a long pull to it, like the whole sea leaned in. The rain stopped. My ears popped. The lantern flared and then went out for the last time with that wet little choke. The light didn't just die. It was smothered. I stood in the dark and felt the pressure change. The air was thin and thick at once. The whole ruin took a breath inward. That's the only way I can say it. Like something held down far below inhaled and pulled the world with it. "Okay," I said. "Okay." I could hear my voice come back from the stones like I was under a bridge. I pulled out the lighter and flicked it. No flame. The lighter was dry. My fingers were wet. The sparks made little stars and went out. The water on the floor pulled toward the center. Thin sheets ran along the grooves between the rings. They made a soft sound like hair brushing skin. I couldn't see it, but I felt it moving past my boots. I stepped back and bumped into a chain hanging from a ceiling hook. It clinked. It vibrated once, as if it had been slack, and then pulled, and then went slack again. I put my hand on it, and it was warm too. I went for the entrance again. I had to. Even I had to admit I'd messed up. I ran a hand along the wall and found the arch. The outside was a roar. I stuck my head into it and saw nothing but spray. A slab slid down behind me. Maybe it was a gust flipping a hanging stone. Maybe it was the pressure. It didn't matter. It came down like a lid on a pot. It didn't slam. It settled. The wrong direction wind stopped. The roar of the sea went flat. The thump under the floor was the only thing left. I was inside then. No light. Wet stone and my own breath and that slow beat deep below. I put my hands out and felt the carved rings on the floor, the little notches. I thought of the notes. I thought of the locals. I thought of the weights I had moved. I thought of the plug I had let fall. I thought of the recorder dying at the one arch where it mattered. The pressure dropped again. My ears screamed. The sea outside didn't sound like a sea anymore. It sounded like a lot of water going the wrong way very fast. The low thump picked up. Not much, just a little, like excitement. All at once the air got cold. Not fresh cold, wet cold. It came up through the rings. It hit my hands and my wrists and my face as if something below exhaled. I flinched. I took a step back and my heel went out from under me. I slid along the wet groove and my hand shot out by pure stupid luck and grabbed an iron ring in the floor. It turned under my fingers. It was set on a pivot. It turned smooth and easy like it had been waiting to move. The center plate lifted a hair with a sound like fingers on stone. The beat under the floor was right there now. Too close, too simple, not a trick of acoustics or water. It was a heart. Slow. Patient. Larger than anything should be. I don't know what I said. Maybe I said no. Maybe I said stop. I know I put both hands on that iron ring and pulled it back the other way with everything I had. It turned and turned through slime. Something under the plate caught and then let go. The next wave came up the cliff like a wall. I felt it through the stone before it hit. The ruin lifted. The floor under me heaved. The center plate bucked. The groove water leaped and slapped my face. The slab at the entrance settled all the way down and locked with a dull clack like a jaw closing. It was quiet, like being deep underwater, and then the breath came. Right up through the open sliver at the center. Full and wet and warm enough to fog my lips. I don't remember letting go. I remember the iron ring turning in my hands on its own, lazy in the brine. I remember a sound close to my ear that wasn't a voice. It was breath. It smelled like old salt and long-closed rooms. It touched my ear like a hand. The last thing I saw, because the lighter sparked once when it rubbed in my pocket, was a thin line of water standing up in the center like a tendril, and the iron ring beside my knee turning once more, slow, the rust bleeding off it into the little whirl below. Then the wet breath came again, right against my ear, and the light went out. I hope you enjoyed that one. Sometimes these stories stay with you longer than you expect. If you'd like to hear more, subscribe for the next night's story. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and maybe watch another before the lights go out. See you in the next one.